Welcome to Rooted, Stories of Entrepreneurship and Agribusiness, a podcast from Colorado State University's Department of Agricultural and Resource Economics. I'm your host, Lauren Chenerides. I'm currently an assistant professor of agricultural business at Colorado State University, where I teach a course on agribusiness entrepreneurship. In this podcast series, we explore stories of how people across the food and agriculture industry identify problems, create solutions, and build or improve businesses that make an impact. What makes Rooted unique is that each episode is co-hosted by students in the agribusiness entrepreneurship course who bring their own curiosity and questions to the table. Their conversations with leaders across food and agriculture are a chance to learn, reflect, and share those insights with you, our audience of students, entrepreneurs, and change makers in food and agriculture. I appreciate your time and attention, and I'm excited to share these inspiring stories with you. All right, I'm joined today by our student co-hosts, Alex, Jaden, and Savron's going to be joining us in a little while. And our guest today is Scott McClure. Scott's background is in product management, where his job was to understand what engineers can build and what customers will pay for. Scott has delivered products to market in the printing, data storage, and data security sectors with experience spanning Dow 30 companies, Fortune 500 firms, and pre-revenue startups. His work includes market validation, technology integration, and financial planning. And he's always asking this question of what's the benefit and who's willing to pay for it? Welcome to the podcast, Scott.
Welcome to the podcast. I'm Alex, a junior studying soil crop science and livestock business management. I will be your host today, so welcome to the podcast. Scott, it's really good to have you.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you and help the next generation of entrepreneurs. While you might say I don't fit the classic definition of an entrepreneur, I have created businesses, played the role of an entrepreneur as a product manager in large and small technology companies. I started my career after graduating from CSU Engineering with the goal of being in the automotive industry, not very entrepreneurial. But I quickly found that industry too structured for my taste, both organizationally and financially. And within a few years, I was working for a laser printer startup, moving from sales to being the bridge between sales and engineering. I found the role of an entrepreneur within any company, product manager. Product managers are often called the business owner of a product, and to satisfy my hands-on curiosity, I also started renovating houses.
Awesome. That's so cool. I think, honestly, you started, what I'm hearing from you, Scott, is like you started with, a more clear path for an engineer, it sounds like. You started going to the automotive industry, and then the fact that you found that a bit too structured for your taste, maybe, navigating into another role and found that you have this sort of entrepreneurial calling within you. Would you say that that's true?
Very true.
Yeah.
And one thing I will say, in the 80s when I graduated, engineering was a structured course. Mm-hmm. The concept of teaching anything entrepreneurial was entirely foreign. So I'm really excited about these kinds of things. I wish this had been around when I was going through CSU, because I think I would have recognized my good and bad habits much sooner.
And so much of what was structured in our curriculum, we have very designed pathways. You're trained to be an engineer. These are the kind of, you take these courses, you can line up these employers. And so the fact that you were able to navigate that and then find your calling to be the entrepreneur is really great, because that's what this course is all about, is really just finding what does entrepreneurship mean, not just in starting your own company, but also working within an organization. It sounds like product manager really allows for that sort of intrapreneurial mindset.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Correct.
And that's one of the things I love about Scott. He's like very multidisciplinary, and we've learned a lot about him, and that really dives into our next thing here. So today we'll be diving into one of the most fundamental challenges in business, the question of how to transform a complex idea into a product that customers are not just willing, but eager to pay for. Scott, it's a pleasure to have you. Like I mentioned before, I think you bring a lot to the table. Briefly, I would also like to have my co-host introduce himself, Jaden.
Good morning, guys. My name's Jaden. I'm a third-year agricultural business major.
Scott Like I mentioned before, your background's very diverse, spanning engineering, like we mentioned before, also real estate and business ownership. Today, in short, we're talking about the secret to creating true business value.
I'm super thrilled to be a part of this conversation. I really like the question we're exploring this morning, how to turn an idea into something people truly value. Obviously, it's pretty central not only to business success, but to innovation in food and agriculture as well. Before we dive in, I'd love to build on what Alex just said about your diverse background. You've worked across several industries that don't seem immediately connected, from high-tech storage to real estate to consulting. How have those different experiences shaped the way you think about value creation?
Thanks for asking about different industries, because one common misconception in both large corporations and entrepreneurship is that industry knowledge trumps the skills, the management skills. In reality, history has shown that the need to think like an entrepreneur is common across multiple markets, multiple industries, and you can acquire the industry experience, but you need to start with an entrepreneurial skill set specific to your situation. You create value by solving problems that couldn't be solved before. This statement is independent of any industry, market, or technology. Arguably, it turns the question around. If you understand the problem and you have the ability to solve it, you've created value. But you need to be able to see the big picture, to understand the technology, to understand the customer's methodology, and to understand the existing ways to solve the problem.
Honestly, that's pretty fascinating to me, especially how each role seems to build on your ability to bridge technical insight with like market reality. I think it's a great foundation for the discussion ahead.
I agree with that. For our listeners, we're going to use Scott's career as a roadmap for this interview. First, we'll establish your central philosophy, the difference between a feature and a benefit. Next, we'll explore the key challenges and pivots you've made while developing products and bringing them to market. And finally, we'll conclude with a mentorship Q&A to get your personal advice on leadership and career growth.
I love that structure. Each stage of your career really illustrates a different aspect of that philosophy, especially your focus on translating engineering into something customers truly understand and want.
That journey, like I said, leads us straight into the core philosophy. You said you work to translate engineering into customer value, always centered on the question, what's the benefit and who's willing to pay for it? In your consultancy work, what is the single most important action a startup team can do to ensure that they're truly listening to consumer, customer, and validating the market instead of just building what they want? Why is it key to listening to the customer?
Well, there's a phrase I learned long ago in entrepreneurship. As a matter of fact, I still have a coffee cup with it on it. Your opinion, though interesting, is not relevant. As your idea, of course you're going to think it's great and more important that other people are willing to pay money for it. But in reality, the customer, and only the customer's opinion, is what matters. Not only must your solution be great, but it must be a better problem solver than the alternatives that are in the market today. And there's always some kind of alternative out there that they can buy to solve their problem. It's often said that sales is the art of solving a customer's problem. Well, entrepreneurship is the art of determining what the customer's problem is, sometimes even before they know it themselves. Then the sales job becomes the easy part. As for validation, that boils down to listening more than talking. The key to success is first, talk to a lot of people, not just a few. Second, ask open-ended questions and avoid promoting your own solution. And third, always ask, who else can I talk to? I've found a customer council of industry leaders you can bounce ideas off of on a regular basis, and trust will be very useful. It's something that we did at StorageTek.
You know, that's really what you're discovering. What you're discussing is called customer discovery. Is
Yes.
that right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so for startup companies, what you're asking Alex too, I think is so important, because for somebody who's trying to at least just identify what the problem is, one of the things that we talk about a lot is customer discovery. And what I hear from you, Scott, is that in order to really identify what is the core problem being solved, we need to talk to a lot of people.
Yes,
Right?
that is
And
exactly right.
not necessarily, go in with what we think is the right solution, but actually let the solution come to us. Does that seem kind of what the customer discovery process helps to expose?
Very correct, and I'll even make it even more succinct. It boils down to shut up and listen. That is the biggest challenge. People have a passion of talking about their solution. And what we need to do is get out there early before we spend a lot of time and money and say, okay, here's what I think. more focused on what's your problem, and then let them go on and explain what's making them angry, and so that you can figure out how to fix it.
Yeah, fascinating.
Customer discovery. Very simple, very succinct. You're
Very
absolutely
simple,
right.
a big bang for your buck. Yep.
To me, that makes perfect sense. You're describing a process that's part communication, part empathy, and you're understanding both what's technically possible and what people actually need. I think a lot of our listeners will recognize how critical that balance is, even beyond tech.
I agree. And if I could add something, I think the validation process is just so important. We touched about a little bit about just listening more than doing the talking. And I think a lot of startups, that's one of their, I think 50% is what one of their pitfalls, or what they fail on, is because they market themselves more so than, finding their market. So, and that goes straight into our next stage of our podcast here. You've been a product manager across different high-stakes industries, and you've said, we don't want features, we want benefits. Let's focus on the challenge of viability. In your experience, both with major companies as an advisor for startups, and success often hinges on a critical pivot. Could you share an example or a story from your career, perhaps a notable change or near miss at a company where a product was technically strong, but you had to step in and fundamentally shape the messaging or strategy to find the true customer who would be willing to pay for it?
Good question, and you're absolutely right. Learning to pivot or being aware of a pivot is absolutely critical as you're moving through this process. In the early 2000s, I was hired by StorageTek to develop the next generation of enterprise-class tape drives. The assumption at the time was that lower volume, significantly higher priced drives, we're talking 10 times what a commodity product would cost, were reaching the end of their useful market, and the lower end commodity drives would be functionally comparable to enterprise class, products made only by StorageTek and IBM. But we started talking to our customers, and we found there were 2 or 3 unique key characteristics they were willing to pay for, a lot more for. We gathered the data, quantified the number of customers, and took this information to Pat Martin, who was then the CEO of StorageTek. And we convinced him to invest significantly more money, several $1 million, in another generation of enterprise-class tape products. This market exists to this day as a division of Oracle, with roughly $500 million in revenue since we brought these products to market. In addition, while developing this product, we talked to customers and found out that there were some critical data security issues that are now well known 20 years later, and were not being addressed in the market. We did the market research again, quantified the need, and we ended up delivering the first generation of data at rest encrypted storage devices. As part of the project, we also learned the importance of delivering a complete solution independent of schedule. As is often the case in complex projects, we were running late, missing deadlines, and there was a strong push to meet the schedule and drop features to do so. Another old adage in product management is you can't sell a 3-wheeled car in a 4-wheeled market. You don't get 3/4 of the market if one axle is stuck in the dirt. In the end, we pushed the schedule instead of trying to deliver less than a viable solution in the original amount of time, and were very successful when we did.
So I want to ask a follow-up question on this. So when you were going through that process, you're in the company and you're having to adjust your timeline. And so my question to you is, what was the support structure like within the company to ensure that you were able to deliver the product without rushing, without urgency, so that you could meet the needs that or meet your goals of designing that product?
It was a non-trivial challenge.
Really?
Yes, because generally, most people within an organization, you find vertical organizations within a corporation. They have their deadlines. In this case, it was development, had some financial incentives to meet certain deadlines. Project management, entrepreneurship, I think one of the reasons you hear more about it in smaller companies than large is because it's a top-down push. I had the support of top levels of management when we sat down and listened. This wasn't an emotional conversation, this was a financial one. And without the support of the top of StorageTek, I believe we would have shipped the product early.
Yeah, that's incredible. And it could cost so many. I mean, what would you have ballpark? What would the cost have been?
I'm not sure the product ever would have been successful.
Yeah.
As I was talking to the head of development at the time, I said, you never get a second chance at a first impression. Mm-hmm. If we deliver an inferior product, and then IBM delivers a superior product, it is much harder to recover from that than waiting an extra quarter or two and delivering slightly behind IBM, but delivering a better product.
Absolutely. And for somebody who's working for maybe a smaller company, a smaller scale company, what would you advise to them in that situation?
Wait.
Yeah.
We see this all the time, especially in smaller companies, because you don't have the resources to recover from an announcement and marketing standpoint. If you deliver an inferior product early, people don't come back.
Yep. Yep. And it's the same thing we see in the food industry. Repeat customers are so important for food businesses that are competing in a very saturated market. And you're talking about tech, so it may not be as saturated, but it's dominated by very large players. And people have, I imagine, very strong loyalties to their suppliers. They have strong loyalties to software. They're training people to use these things, and the cost of switching, I can imagine, is really high for these companies who are buying from certain suppliers. So that just really rings true.
In classic marketing, the argument is always it's so much cheaper to retain the customer you have than to steal the customer you want. And we often forget that in other portions of the company.
Your whole experience is such a valuable lesson for people that are just starting up or aren't very motivated. It really shows how product development isn't just about the product, but it's more about people, persuasion, and like your perspective.
I agree. I think so far we've talked about validation, customer discovery. I do want to zone into more of the agribusiness side as well in entrepreneurship. So how do farmers think like entrepreneurs?
I think farming is an excellent example of entrepreneurship. As I mentioned, entrepreneurs need to think like a business owner. And what farmer doesn't? Especially small farms, where you need to wear multiple hats and there are so many variables outside of your control. Not just your markets, but things like the weather and other unconstrainable situations.
So looking at the big picture of technology today, how can tech fill those gaps and help the farmer's bottom line?
I break new products into two categories, home runs and base hits. A home run is something that no one has thought of before. It's generally driven from engineering, like when VisiCalc was invented or the first laser printer. They can be hugely successful and game-changing and generate a lot of income. But, like home runs, they are rare and prone to failure when tried. On the other hand, taking existing technology and moving it into new markets, such as taking industrial farming projects to the small farmer, those are base hits. Far more frequent, far easier to deliver, far less risk. Just in our small group, we've discussed several opportunities that are only now cost effective, and we've already discussed the key that is talking to the customers and the markets first.
Exactly, and I love your input because I personally work with drones, remote sensing, sensors, and a lot of the times there's not a lot access to them because of the cost. Drones, especially remote sensing like multispectral imagery, there is a cost to that, and sometimes farmers can easier access would be like satellite imagery where it's free and more easily accessible, and they might, depending on what their operation is, they might not need a $10,000 drone to map their field. So my question is, would lowering costs and maybe even drone technology allow for improvements?
Drone technology is an excellent example of using new technology to bring down costs without fundamentally redesigning the process a small farmer would use. Drones and low-cost continuous sensors, they'd likely deliver far more accurate information and reducing the guesswork that smaller farms have to do today. Just 5 to 10 years ago, this technology would have been out of reach of all but the largest farmers. This doesn't require us to change the farmer's methodology, simply to provide more accurate data at lower cost.
That's super interesting, especially your point about overcomplication. Sometimes the real innovation is simplifying how we deliver value and not adding more layers of technology.
All right, we're joined back now with Savron. So Savron, welcome.
Hi, hello everyone. My name is Savron. I'm an agricultural business major, originally from Uzbekistan, where it's located in Central Asia.
Also, Savron, it's glad to have you here. Scott, that tying back into what we talked about throughout our podcast so far, all the advice is incredibly valuable. Now, as a team leader, coach, and teacher, you focus heavily on developing people. This next segment is an opportunity for me and other students listening to get some personal mentorship advice. Your insights have shown us that while principles like customer validation are universal, their application often changes based on the market. That leads us perfectly into our next perspective. Savron, from your experience coming to the U.S. to study agribusiness, what key differences have you observed in the approach to entrepreneurship and innovation in the ag industry back home versus here?
When I compare entrepreneurship in agriculture between Uzbekistan and US, I notice some clear differences. Back home, entrepreneurship has really started to grow up since 2016. Before then, Uzbekistan mostly focused on selling cotton, raw cotton, but after our second president introduced new policies for cotton recycling and textile manufacturing, things began to change. The government started giving more opportunities to young business owners. For example, 2018 was the year of support for active entrepreneurship and innovative ideas, and 2024 is the year of young and business support. Uzbekistan is also growing fast as a business hub. Half of Central Asia's population lives there, and the demand for processed food is rising. The country has a great trade access to nearby markets and even high-income regions. It's now attracting more investors and creating new chances for young entrepreneurs. On the other hand, here is the US. Entrepreneurship feels more independent and fast-moving. People take more personal risks, and innovation often comes from private companies for universities. Because I understand how the government works, especially in agriculture. I personally want to work for my government to help support young entrepreneurs and continue improving the system from within. Speaking of innovation, Scott, what kind of ideas or technologies do you think can help make agriculture more innovative in developing countries?
So first, let me say this is pretty exciting. I'm personally thrilled to have someone like you here learning these kinds of things and then taking America's very strange entrepreneurial skills back to other countries. So this is cool. It's an excellent question. As we discussed earlier, entrepreneurship is a methodology and a mindset which can be done in startups or large corporations. And isn't government just a really large corporation with the power to make things happen? I should warn you, large corporations move slowly, and being a change agent within can be a challenge. The larger organizations, it's harder to move the ship. You'll need to think like a product manager does in a large corporation here. And that's actually a good book on this topic called The Innovator's Dilemma, written all the way back in 1997. It focuses on the challenge of being a change agent within a large corporation, focused on actually developing products that wouldn't naturally evolve within the organization itself. One key to success is just when you talk to the markets, you are not just talking to the customers. So in this case, your customers will often be your bosses. Bring data to provide your point. Remember that your soft skills to speak the language of those you need to convince. And with these skills, I think you'll learn here and take back home with you to Uzbekistan. You'll be very successful.
That's such an important question. And Scott, when you think about the soft skills, which one has surprised you the most in its the importance, something that maybe didn't seem critical early on, but turned out to be essential later in your career?
This is an excellent question, and it should be noted that when startups are evaluated for funding, the quality and diversity of the team is just as important as the solution itself. You need to make sure you have a broad set of business skills, marketing skills, and if appropriate, manufacturing and channel delivery, etc. One of the advantages of a smaller startup is you have the natural focus on the product to succeed. You still bear the risks of one group, often development or sales, overruling the logical risks of other critical functions needed to be successful. We talked about that when we were discussing the push out at StorageTek. When I was at IBM, They were famous for building great technical solutions, but they had a bad habit of building great products and very few companies wanted to buy or were very expensive on completion. It was part of a core team, or I was part of a core team that developed IPDS for Printing Systems Group up here in Boulder. Similar to where each project, we put together a diverse group of people from engineering, manufacturing, supply, Marticle, all the vertical organizations within IBM that needed to make the product successful. The team had to agree as a group at each major step of the process to proceed with a high-level review and sign off on it. After time, this became an industry standard for cross-functional solution development teams. Another suggestion around building these high-performing teams is to look at the different skills within each team member. There's a variety of ways to quantify this. One I prefer is from Gallup called StrengthsFinder. It's a personality test designed to break down each person's strengths and weaknesses in a way that you can address individual personality gaps for a high-functioning team. I'd also recommend this as an individual learning tool because it tells you what you're good at and to focus on those skills and mitigate what you're not so strong on instead of using your time, your limited time, to improve what you're not strong at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I just want to follow up on this real quick too. So, thinking about what I'm hearing you say, Scott, thinking about putting together teams, it's not that any one person is going to be able to have all the characteristics that they need, the soft skills, the hard skills, all the things to run a business. You need to have a good team that has complementary skills. And I love the suggestion about the Gallup StrengthsFinder, where you get to take an assessment, you learn a bit more about yourself and what your strengths are, and then you lean into those strengths. And then you find those people with the complementary strengths that may be a weakness or maybe not as strong for you to help assemble the right group of people. So great suggestion, Scott.
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. I think what this portion of the segment is what's so valuable is because maybe startups right out of the bat and entrepreneurs not thinking about the global market right away. They might be thinking of capital and their product immediately in startups, but definitely farmers and definitely for growth, there is an opportunity to think about the global market and to understand that as well. I think it's very important. So, Scott, this has been an incredibly insightful conversation covering everything from product strategy and market validation to human skills needed to lead a team. Before we close, let's discuss capital. It's definitely a question that I think a lot of young entrepreneurs have and people that want to start their own businesses. So when you first launched your business, what was the initial source of capital that got you off the ground? And what are the biggest challenges you faced in securing that first round of funding?
With regard to capital investment, I'll give the advice we give entrepreneurs now. The further along you can get before you need to ask for money, the better off you'll be. Having a job allowed me to invest a lot of time and money without having to ask for equity sharing. For all the funds I needed, I was able to go the conservative route and borrow from banks. This also limited my opportunity to grow, so there are trade-offs to that. Even this became useful later when evaluating others at the level of risk they were willing to take. I would often talk to people. We talked about entrepreneurship being a mentality, and I would sit down with people who had made changes in their career, and I'd look them in the eye and I'd say, you willing to put your house on the market or as a backup for your investment funding? The look on their faces would give you an idea of how much they're an entrepreneur. If you're raising for investment capital, I've been saying for decades there is plenty of money in the world. If your idea isn't finding investors, it's more likely a problem with the idea or the team than a lack of capital in the market. If you want to pursue this further, CSU Ventures is a group inside the university where you can look at different ideas, and they're very good at helping you get patents. Indosphere is here in Fort Collins at the north end of town, and they're a good one outside the group. And if you're looking for significant capital investment, Rocky Venture Club down in Denver is another place to look.
That's great. Yeah, we talk a lot about incubators, accelerators, other what's the ecosystem of entrepreneurship within the northern Fort Collins area. And I love the suggestions: Innosphere, CSU Ventures, and what was the third one?
Rockies Venture Club. They're
Rockies
actually based
Venture
out of
Club.
Denver. They are the largest, no, not largest. They are the oldest capital investment organization in the U.S., and they're based out of
Wow.
Denver.
Amazing, amazing. Yeah, I mean, the fact that you took the, going through debt financing with banks and smaller loans, that's something that we talk a little bit about too, of just, at what point does it make sense to pursue bigger sources of venture capital, especially for startup companies who may oftentimes just start with bootstrapping. So I'm curious, like, if you were to take a survey of all of the startups that you mentor, what percentage of those are really going after those big financiers?
Everybody's always looking for money.
Yes.
So I will say, since you're in the university program, a lot of federal grant money, which is non-dilutive, is a great place to start. Again, CSU Ventures is where you would look into that. It's tough because we see people generally looking initially for non-dilutive grant money, then for dilutive or investment capital, simply because they're generally looking for starting at hundreds of thousands, which is the low end of Rockies Venture Club, into millions, which is now you're talking about Sand Hill, places like that across the United States. So I would venture most companies go the way I did. They find their own money, or use a phrase, if you get into this, you should know, friends, family, and fools, the 3 F's. But we don't see those as much. We're usually involved with companies that need higher capital requirements.
Sure. And when you say dilutive, you mean taking equity of the company?
Yes, you're sharing a chunk of your future to get money back.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. And every founder is different in terms of their willingness to give up equity.
And I will actually say, mentioning Innosphere, they have regular lunch and learn classes on exactly this topic.
Okay, very good, very good. Yeah. So if anyone wants to learn more about this process of the startup journey, they can go to these classes and these workshops at Innosphere.
I love that. Really, when starting a business, I think the support system is very important, and not only for mentors like you, Scott, but also opportunities for funding and for growth just overall. So those are great. What advice would you give to students starting in agribusiness today?
If there's one takeaway I want you to get from this session, it would have to be 2. First, listen to the customer. If there's a disconnect, they're right, and you need to find out why. Second, don't be afraid to jump, but do it with data. We touched on this before. I entered the technology market back when we were arguing over DOS command prompts versus Windows icons, mice, and pointers. Technology has matured enough that we now would be able to better suited to see where technology has been and use that technology in traditional industries such as yours, agriculture. People love to talk about what AI can do. I personally think that people like you 3 and your class can far improve the world simply by taking what we already have and applying it in traditional industries. Drones for instant visual feedback, sensors for more data feedback, building data tracking systems that make borders and time irrelevant are all great examples and far lower risk. There's an old adage in technology evolution. First you come up with an idea, first you adapt the technology to your existing processes. Then you adapt the processes to the new technology. And it always takes longer than we think because we think everything's solved in 6 months nowadays. The latter half truly builds on the improvement. As an example, no one ever said, hey, I'm going to use these sheets with boxes and add everything together because I'm using a pencil. Can you come up with something that's a computer that would do this better? Most of you arrived after VisiCalc, the precursor to Lotus 123, the precursor to Microsoft Excel. But as someone who lived through that period, I would argue the improvements in the last 15 years matched or exceeded the initial changes where we moved from pencil and paper to a green screen on a small tube monitor. I look forward to seeing what you all do as you move from college to career. Feel free to keep in touch. And I still remember several mentors from decades back that still guide me today. If I can do the same for you in some small way, I'd be honored. If you have an idea, again, CSU Ventures, the Venture Accelerator Group, the Powerhouse Campus here at the north end of Fort Collins, and Fort Collins itself through Innosphere, please reach out.
That's a very powerful note to end on, Scott. Thank you again for sharing your valuable experience and your time and your wisdom today.
Now, this project's been a lot of fun. It's been a pleasure getting to know the 3 of you and your professor, Dr. Shanaradas. This is a great country because we focus on putting the best people in the best positions to do the best things. And you're our next generation to do that.
Thank you so much, and thank you for our listeners for tuning in. And
Yeah, thanks everybody for being here. Thank you, Jaden, Savron, Alex, and most importantly, Scott. Thanks for being with us today. Appreciate it.